All right, welcome to this episode of Inside Aviation. I'm Kevin,
I'm Ryan.
and today we have Mark Phelps. He's a senior editor at AvWeb, also an instrument-rated private pilot. He's worked at various different publications and a brief stint at a manufacturer. He's the owner of a Grumman American A1B, which I didn't know until now, and a V-tail Bonanza, which we should have asked him about because those things are awesome. But before we get to that, let's cover a couple of top stories. Ryan, so NTSB news, what's going on over there?
Well, Jennifer Hamady was reconfirmed as the NTSB chair once again. Sort of goes alongside the FAA Reauthorization bill. And what you hear us talk about with Mark, I think the common theme there is that finally, I think the aviation industry as a whole, whether it's commercial, GA, well, obviously not military, but commercial, GA, and others are getting a sigh of relief and a little more stability, if there ever is any in this business, after COVID. And just having a confirmed NTSB chair for the next several years is a pretty big win for the industry, as I think it is.
Yeah, she's been overall just well received. She's been a kind of an advocate for the industry in different ways. I'm a huge fan of her. I'm the president of her fan club, but looking forward to see how she keeps working there and keeps changing things, especially with the FAA Reauthorization Act, where they got a little more funding there. Ryan, here's a fun topic. So we talk about urban air mobility all the time, or advanced air mobility, whatever they call it nowadays. And we talk about it a little bit in the conversation with Mark Phelps. But something that I talked about way back in our interview with Jack is, why don't they just develop the engine technology that they're developing and battery technology and just plug it into, a working, helicopter? We have all these systems already in place. Why don't we just do that? And Airbus is kind of doing that with a hybrid electric demonstrator, which I think is super interesting. They're calling it the X3, Airbus X3 demonstrator, which is, it sounds exactly like what you think it is. It's a hybrid, runs to a battery, electric motor helps at times, doesn't go full electric, but it does have eco mode, which uses both power plants. I think this is kind of it's not really news right now, but I think this could be a huge portion of the advanced air mobility.
It has legs, right?
Yeah, it does.
And I think you're seeing that too materialize in other fixed wing sectors as well. That hybrid electric model, which, think about it. That's kind of how I'm not a car guy, but certainly how I perceive it is that's how the auto industry kind of moved into all electric vehicles. The first kind of quote unquote green car was the Prius, and that was of course a hybrid, and started moving into getting other manufacturers made hybrid vehicles, and then you're starting to see the growth of electric vehicles, which I don't know if I really have a strong stance on it. I don't own one, but I can understand why people would. And I think that's kind of maybe what you're seeing now is starting it into. It's a little more comfortable for people to have a hybrid electric vehicle, kind of using that as a stepping stone into the all electric world.
Yeah, if I had to make a bet right now, I would bet on this hybrid, aircraft world, going straight into electric from there. Because going right into electric I don't think the tech's there for the batteries to, hold you for a long range, but also just the safety of the engine technology is not tested. Maybe they're very safe, but we just don't have the flight hours to prove it. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see where this goes with Airbus, and I think it should be a bigger story. But we'll talk about a little bit about that with Mark, about how that's going to fit into the national airspace system when that gets going, the whole advanced air mobility stuff. But yeah, I guess we'll kick it over to him and we can get ripping on this new FAA Authorization Act recap. All right, Mark Phelps, thanks for joining us on Inside Aviation. Can you tell the audience a little bit about what you do at AvWeb and a little bit about your aviation background?
Sure. They asked me what title I wanted, and I'm senior, so I said I'll be a senior editor if that's okay with you. They like that, so that's what I am. Essentially, I do 2 news shifts a week, 2 AvWeb Av flashes per week, and that means a couple of days of just digging through the news and seeing what's been written and what we don't want to let get by. So that's basically what I do with AvWeb. I've been in aviation journalism since about 1985, where I actually started with, of all places, Flying Magazine when it was at 1 Park Avenue in New York with Richard Collins and Mac McClellan and the old guard. So that was my start. I spent some time working with EAA out in Oshkosh, then came back to New Jersey. I'm originally from Boston, but back to New Jersey, where I worked for AIN for a total of about 22 years with a little gap in between. I spent some time working in communications at Dassault, which was illuminating in a lot of ways. And then kind of did a lot of freelance work and wound up working with AvWeb, and it's working out pretty well for me at this stage in my career.
That's awesome. So we had an office at one point in New York City. Like, that's crazy to think of.
Oh yeah.
Aviation Magazine had an office in New York
City.
Yeah,
it was pretty bizarre. It started out at 1 Park Avenue, and in the course of the time that I was there, it moved up to 1515 Broadway, which is right in Times Square.
Wow.
That would have been so fun.
Those are some addresses too. Park Avenue, Broadway.
Yeah,
that would have been so fun.
We used to call 1 Park Avenue the address that sounds better than it is.
That would have been fun to still have that. We can talk about it this whole time another time. But we kind of want to talk to you today about the FAA Reauthorization that was passed by the House yesterday. Can you talk a little bit about your piece you put out yesterday and kind of the initial sentiment from the industry?
Yeah, sure. Well, it's this has been an ongoing thing now, and stops and starts, and in fact, the Senate had passed their version of it last week, and Amelia Walsh wrote a very good piece on that. And then this was basically getting, dotting all the I's and crossing the T's between the House and the Senate, and hammering out the final details and shooting it off to the Oval Office for signature. And it's, I guess, the overall sentiment of this is that it's about time. We've been staggering along with just temporary measures to keep the lights on and keep the ATC running, and there's been no stability for the FAA. The reauthorization kind of follows up on last October, finally confirming a long-term administrator, and that was a long time coming. So I think what people are seeing is there's finally going to be some stability. Two operative words: finally and stability. So,
yeah. Which is crazy we didn't have in the industry. The ATC stuff, we can dive into it a little bit. I know you sent me that NADCA piece that quick little statement they put out last night. Mm-hmm. They can they're at their maximum hiring rate for the next 5 years, correct? They are adopting the staffing model that NADCA and FAA work together to put together. And are they installing these new simulators and training facilities to expedite training during those 5 years? Or were those already there?
To the best of my knowledge, they're not there, and that was part of what their contribution to the reauthorization bill was to put that in motion. I honestly do not know what stage that is at. Are there any simulators? I'm just not really aware.
No, I agree. It'll be interesting to see if it's if it's going to be an in-house FAA thing or if they contract the simulators out. Does next gen come into play here, or is that another thing for ATC, the next gen ATC system?
Well, I think just in general terms, next gen has been going on for 20 years at least. The whole thing about we've got years ago we still have tube radios in our control towers. So trying to catch up with technology has been ongoing for quite some time. As far as making the solid advancements, I mean, we have ADS-B was a big step forward, and that gave us reduced vertical separation minimums with the greater tracking and so forth. So it's not like there haven't been advances, but I think the full capabilities of a digital air traffic control system have been kind of hamstrung by not really being able to generate long-term projects through the FAA.
I'm curious too. I think next gen, you can make all the jokes you want about it because it's basically past gen at this point. But
Gen whatever.
there was a there was a report yesterday. I think CNN put it out about the FAA is still short 3,000 controllers nationwide. And if you go to 123atc.com, which is a great resource for anybody about anything air traffic control related, and they have great stats on facility level staffing, you can still see that some of the busiest airspaces are still some of the most poorly staffed. So Jacksonville Center, of course, being one that's been in the news quite a bit, Miami Center. Then, of course, one of the biggest ones has been New York Approach. Just curious, kind of get your all's thoughts on this. Do you think it's time maybe the FAA think a little more differently about how they hire instead of hiring people into the Oklahoma City Academy and then dispersing them, maybe hire on a facility by facility level?
I've never thought about that, but I'm not familiar with how their process actually does work. But frankly, that certainly makes sense to me. If the different sectors are so widely diverse in terms of how they operate and so forth, it's I don't think you could take someone out of New York and plunk them in the middle of Dallas, or vice versa, or certain, and there would certainly be a steep learning curve there. So maybe that would make sense.
And I think for the audience too, it might be good to say, the way the FAA hires controllers is that they bring them in one big application window. They go to the Oklahoma City Academy, of course, if they're accepted. They go through the initial training there, and then they're dispersed based on, I believe, and I don't know if this has changed from the time I was in college, but it was based on test scores. So depending on how you scored on the exam, you would get preference for the list of facilities that need staffing. And so you could really end up anywhere. You could end up in Anchorage, you could end up in Miami, you could end up in the New York Approach. So it was really, I think it creates a bit of uncertainty for people. And the FAA did hire, I did notice, specifically for New York Approach a couple months ago, which I thought was really interesting. I haven't seen that.
I think, Ryan, I'm with you. Like, I would have seriously taken a look at a career in ATC if I knew what facility I was going to. But I also think, like, the double-edged sword here is there enough interest in Fargo, North Dakota area to, like, hire locally, or, like, people wanting to go work there? So it's stuff like that, or I think, it would work for some spots, not others. But quickly back to the FAA stuff. This was a huge win for GA. I thought it was like funding for general aviation airports. So for the funding for airport projects went up to $4 billion, which is, I think it's up $675 million from last time, and most of that will go straight to GA airports. There's going to be an FBO transparency fee study by the Office of the GAO, which is incredible. And then basic med pilots can fly aircraft up to 12,500 pounds. I mean, this is like it's not being talked about enough. This is a huge win. The FBO transparency thing is awesome. We just saw the effects of it during the Super Bowl and what was that other event? F1 in Vegas. They were outrageous. What do you think this means for GA, Mark?
Well, it's those are all good things, and I think that I guess what I hear is that they have actually been listening to the stakeholders, whether it's AOPA or GAMA, General Aviation Manufacturers Association, National Business Aviation Association. And as you said, NATCA, the controllers, their voices were heard, and these pieces were put into the funding stream. So all good.
I think, the one thing I looked over too was $34 million for transient parking at GA airports, or just overall airports, which is, I don't think, like, it's incredible. Like, Ryan, I know you're an airline guy, but having transient parking is so good at an airport without having to, like, go pay an
yeah.
FBO ramp
I worked at a
fee.
GA airport in
Oh,
Dallas.
there you go.
See, I know.
You know GA stuff, I guess.
But you know what's really interesting, Kevin, I want to add to that is that going back to kind of the controller thing, now that they're approved to hire additional controllers, there's a bigger budget in place to train and get people into these facilities. I think you're going to see a little bit more, maybe better support from ATC for the GA community. And of course, the airline side as well, right? Because the airlines are the ones out there kind of complaining constantly about Jacksonville Center because it really does impact their operations, and especially after COVID and Florida demand and all that. But I think you might be able to start seeing a world now where there's a little less disparity between the two. And I know a couple months ago, Airlines for America, the lobbying group for the industry, came out and said that GA was part of the problem. I don't agree with that, but I certainly think that you might see a little bit of a better symbiosis between the two moving forward, whether that's boiling down to getting flight following when you need it because there's staffing available, to anything like that. I think that's something that's well overdue.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned next gen with routings and being able to take full advantage of satellite-based navigation systems and ADS-B and so forth. There's so much potential there for optimizing the airspace that really has just barely been scratched.
Yeah, it increases like safety overall. And Airlines for America said that. I didn't know they said that the GA was the problem.
Yeah, they kind of bash those jets. It's like these fat cats in their Gulfstreams are getting in the way of our takeoffs.
All right, guys. All right. Last time they went against GA pretty hard, they lost privatization. So, we were talking a little offline about Alaska and how this impacts Alaska and the weather system up there. Can you guys dive a little bit into that?
Well, I've visited Alaska long decades ago, and I was just saying to Ryan offline, you can drive around a bend. I didn't fly up there, but you can drive around a bend in a mountain and go from bright blue sky to 0 in nothing flat. So the weather there is really extreme, and for the most part, I believe the pilots accommodate that. They're pretty good, but it's an entirely different environment from the lower 48, and it really does need to have special attention. So this is a good sign that they're. And again, Ryan, maybe you know more specifically what it is that they're planning to fund. I know you said AWAS for more airports. Although one of my questions about that is it's nice to know that the airport's clear or VFR, but as I said, you can be 3 miles away from that airport and run into a solid brick wall of cloud. So,
right. Yeah, I was reading a bit up on it. Kevin, you know a little bit about it too, so I'd like to hear your thoughts. But Alaska is notoriously had problems for decades with accidents and incidents related to weather, right? There's very, very limited weather-related coverage there. So certified weather, AWAS, several airports don't have it. And several of those airports are dealing with bush pilots, and they're constantly, having, whether it's a Part 135 operation or even a 91 operation, they're seeing fairly decent amount of traffic. And it's crazy to me that since quite a long time, even though the FAA and NTSB has studied this extensively since the 80s, they've never had kind of a concerted effort to go out and install AWAS. And according to some of the readings that I've been able to do, the FAA can't do a sort of a cost-benefit analysis on this. They have to do it because the Congress saw it as being so important. And I think there's another component of that too, that I'm a big, advocate and proponent for small community air service. And I think in Alaska, it's extremely important, right? Because some of these villages and communities are so isolated. And that's where aviation really shines its light, right? Is connecting these places that are otherwise isolated. And now that certified weather might be available, you might see additional operators feeling more comfortable operating to these areas and providing that additional air service. So I think it's a win-win.
Yeah. It occurred to me as we were speaking. I remember hearing years ago that there was talk, at least, of putting weather sensing equipment not necessarily at the airports, but in passes and different areas where there really is regularly there's problematic weather. So that hopefully that's part of the consideration as well. And the other thing that came to my mind talking about Alaska is the air tour industry up there. That's anecdotally, I would guess that a large part of the problem with safety in Alaska is attributable to air tours. Just I don't have statistics on that, but my memory would be that most of the time when you hear about a bad accident, it's involving an air tour aircraft.
Yeah, that's a bummer every time, but you're right, Mark. There was like a specific passes that they wanted to put observation stations and also webcams for pilots, and it looks like by 2030 they should have it along the more trafficked routes, different stations, webcams, and all that. I just did a quick search on the actual bill itself, but not totally going into detail on that. But that's pretty cool that's happening out there. I know I've heard about it from pilots up there so much. They felt like a little bit ignored, I think. But glad they're getting it. Do they have the same coverage of radar and ADS-B as we do down here, or is it much more sparse for it?
I can't speak to that. I just don't know.
I don't know the answer to that either.
But
Ryan's always complaining about radar coverage for airlines. I thought you would know.
Yeah, it's not. It's definitely not. There's some places in the world that have really bad radar coverage. Africa's one, and airlines are very careful about how they plan those flights. But I don't know about Alaska. I would bet that it's actually pretty well done. I don't know.
A few different things. So I just kind of want to breeze over that I think is pretty interesting. Is there will be a working or a task group for mental health and kind of reevaluating like the FAA's like approach to it. I think there's like a timeline where they have to establish that and start that study. There will also be airport ramp worker safety policies that are in place, which as a former ramper, that's awesome. One of my best college jobs ever. But going into that, what does this mean for the airlines, Ryan? And are they happy?
I think the airlines are happy. I think ALPA's happy that age 67 didn't get pushed through, because I think there was a very big concern among the airline pilots unions. We don't need to dive too deep into that now, but that was a big one on their plate. The airlines are happy, I think, in a way that the controllers, like we said earlier, having additional ATC staffing will hopefully alleviate some of their operational issues that they've had in Florida. A little bit of that, to be honest, is self-inflicted because, again, after COVID, airlines dumped tons of capacity into the Florida market. And then you add to that the air traffic control troubles, put those two together, and you have a perfect storm, no pun intended. So I think generally you'll see they're happy. A big one is that nation's capital, DCA, gets us 5 more round-trip slot pairs, so you'll see a little bit more flying out of there, which is pretty significant because that's where Congress flies in and out of. I'm sure they're happy.
The ones that are that live far away are happy. The ones that live close in were
right because they're outside of the 1,250 mile perimeter rule.
Ryan, how do airlines compete for those routes? How do they get those?
Well, it's actually the process has been done in quite a while, but after Biden signs it, the Department of Transportation has 60 days to allocate and award the slot pairings. It's based on it's not like certain other slot controlled airports where there's certain criteria. It's more the airlines have to propose why this is the best option, why they're the best ones to operate it. So I think you're already seeing airlines lining up at the gate here for these. We got Alaska saying they want to do San Diego. That one hasn't been served since 2013.
San Diego to DC.
And then, yeah, to Reagan
Yeah.
National. Because if I call it Reagan or I call it National, people get mad. So you have to call it. I call it DCA, so I can draw the middle. And then American wants to do DCA to San Antonio, which makes actually quite a bit of sense in terms of San Antonio being such a military. They're called Military Town USA, which is just right outside the perimeter rules. So it's really interesting to see that because, again, it hasn't happened by my math. It hasn't happened since 2012 where they've gotten non-perimeter slots. So it's kind of a new industry now and sort of a new eye for network planning. And I think it'll be really interesting to see what these airlines decide to do.
Yeah. I agree. It's kind of interesting seeing the process happen. I've never seen it.
Part of the original proposal was to get rid of the perimeter rule altogether. I think some people are glad that that's not the case. I don't think DCA has the single busiest runway in the United States, runway 119, and I think the airport authority was fairly concerned about having additional traffic there just because that runway gets beaten up quite a bit. They're doing a repaving process now, but so it's really interesting. Just kind of a new world now, and kind of interested to see what happens.
Well, I mean, there's funding in here to increase routes to small communities and also penalize airlines for leaving these smaller markets.
So the penalized one is really interesting because, of course, during COVID, SkyWest, largest regional carrier in the U.S., came out and said, "Look, even with subsidies, we can't serve some of these markets. So we're just going to go ahead and pull out," which is just uncharted territory, right? Because I've personally never seen, after getting the federal government subsidy, a regional airline wanting to pull out. But I think it's a huge win for small communities, and I think without editorializing too much here, I think Congress finally saw that the unit cost on these small regional jets is so much higher than what it was before COVID that they had to do something.
It's going to be interesting to see if they enforce that, which, it's two different things. Final couple things that I wanted to talk about are they're doing more UAS and AAM research, which is Advanced Air Mobility. They change it every time, the name for that. eVTOL Urban Air Mobility, Advanced Air Mobility, which, I don't know what that means, if they're going to streamline certification or dump more money into, a department and the FAA to go after that. And the second thing I want to talk about is unleaded fuel. They're funding it a little bit more and putting more resources into that. I kind of want to bring Russ back on to talk about that because he's going to be like, what's more money going to do? It's going to be interesting. But Mark, as a GA pilot and, somebody who's been in the industry for a while, I think it's a good thing that they're investing in how to bring in advanced, air mobility into the national airspace system. But do you think it'll still be longer than the timelines that these companies are giving? Yeah, by 2030, we'll be, serving communities and doing these short routes.
I don't think anybody knows. And it's the whole landscape of that industry is just all ethereal right now. It's so influenced by people trying to generate investment income into their programs. So you're getting a pretty rosy view of what they think it's going to be. Realistically, my impression is that it's less about the actual vehicles and more about the ATC infrastructure and how we're going to integrate these vehicles into the airspace. People talk about, like you can't be getting your pizza delivered on Fifth Avenue because you've got 6,000 other people who are going to be having their pizzas delivered at the same time. However, in remote areas, it makes perfectly good sense for if you want to live 16 miles from a hardware store, it'd be nice to be able to have them send you out a crescent wrench with a UAV, So it's kind of like cell phones, I mean, nobody really, people are trying to project what an iPhone is going to be and translating that over to a UAV 20 years from now. You couldn't have done when the first cell phones came out, you couldn't have predicted that the iPhone was going to come along. It's going to evolve. It's going to evolve through use and through trial and error and how people perceive it.
I still think, if this all pans out, how these companies are talking about, and everybody wants it to be, where it's, it's drones delivering stuff, it's, making short hops from city to city, or, and even within the city, it's going to rely a ton on existing GA airports that communities currently are, like, in some major metro areas, they're trying to shut down, which it'll be interesting if that sentiment flips, if the dream comes true of, like, urban air mobility, to see if, like, no, I want my airport, or I want it back. Let's turn this park back into an airport. Just full circle moment for us.
That would be nice. I'm skeptical.
Yeah, no, for sure. But I have a whole tangent. Like, I can rant about that all day. Ryan knows about how people moving by airports and complaining about noises. Well, Mark, do you have anything else you want to talk about regarding this, or anything else going on?
Well, I guess the one thing that, as I was just kind of making notes on the whole prospect of how FAA reauthorization is going to impact the industry is, again, we now have an administrator. We now have a 5-year plan, 5-year funding stability for the FAA. So hopefully some of the bright ideas that have been languishing and without funding are going to start moving forward. So that's optimistic. The one thing that hit me when I was looking at this is one of the biggest obstacles to advancing the industry and the regulatory system, or the regulatory framework, was COVID. We basically, aviation came to a screeching halt, and all the infrastructure, all the support, all the supply chain, whether it's fuel or parts or services and so forth, just all came to a screeching halt. And now we're moving it forward, and it's taking this this gigantic ship that was moving along and became dead in the water, and now you're trying to ramp up the speed again. So it's not an easy process, and this is encouraging that we've made this much of a step forward.
Yeah, this one feels good for some reason, and that's rare to say coming out of these.
I think like Mark said, it's just a alleviation from the pressures of COVID, right? Like, it's just like, finally you get a breath of fresh air.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, Mark, we'll have you on for the next one in 5 years. And we can talk about that. Hopefully. But
it takes 5 years.
No, thanks for coming on today. You're welcome back anytime.
Great to be here. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of Inside Aviation with Mark Phelps, Senior Editor at AvWeb. Great discussion as always. Best way to support us is to subscribe. Flying Magazine, Plane and Pilot, IFR Magazine, Aviation Consumer, Kit Planes. There's tons of them. Make sure you go out and take a look at our newsletters as well across all our digital platforms, whether that be AvWeb, Airline Geeks, Flying Mag Digital. Really great content out there, and we really thank you for joining and supporting us.